Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkshire, host, and our guest is Meriem El Haitami, a visiting scholar who is at Yale as the Rice Fellow in the Council on Middle East Studies at the MacMillan Center. Her research explores the dynamics of female religious authority and activism in contemporary Morocco. She has published articles on the role of female faith-based actors in shaping new forms of religious leadership and activism in Morocco. Today we'll talk with Professor El Haitami about women and Sufism in Morocco. Welcome, Professor El Haitami.
Thank you, Marilyn. Glad to be here.
So let's begin with your paper. It's called Women and Sufism, Religious Expression and the Political Sphere in Contemporary Morocco. So tell us about it.
So the article basically explored gender dynamics within Morocco's Sufi tradition. I examined the different styles of participation and leadership within Sufi orders and their complex relationship with the public sphere. I'm particularly interested in the state's adoption of Sufism as the official religious discourse as part of its counter-radicalization strategy to shift toward a more moderate practice of Islam. One of the arguments I make is that adopting Sufism as an official religious discourse contributes to providing a broader role for women and increases their visibility and presence within the public religious sphere, and also presents women's Sufi experience as a well-structured enterprise that constitutes an element within the broader scope of women's engagement with religious knowledge, authority, and activism. Another argument I make is that the mainstreaming of Sufism within Morocco's formal structures of Islam disrupts the binary between official religion that is associated with formal structures of orthodox or legal Islam, as opposed to popular or informal religion that is oftentimes associated with Sufism and constructs the tradition as a heterodox or folkloric practice within Islam. Complicating this binary allows us an understanding of the different realms of women's religious expression and the ways they engage religious authority and activism. In the article, I also draw on hagiographic literature to explore the traditional patterns of female spirituality. I am interested in the conjunctures of tradition and modernity and the continuity of Sufism as a postmodern reality and how that shifts the dynamics of female spiritual expression.
Okay, let's start with the word Sufism. Tell us what that is exactly.
So Sufism is generally defined as Islamic mysticism, or the spiritual or esoteric dimension of Islam that incorporates techniques by which a person seeks a direct or a personal encounter with the divine.
So what kind of techniques?
It's devotional practices. It's kind of like meditation.
Okay. Does it vary dramatically from Islam?
So basically, it is a tradition within Islam.
Okay.
So by the 11th or 12th centuries, Sufism, that started as a spiritual movement, developed into organizational structures currently known as Sufi orders or brotherhoods.
Okay.
And these structures have, over periods of history, served as major scholarly and spiritual centers of edification within Islam and have had major social and political roles. So basically, Sufism is oftentimes cast as the quietest or disengaged practice of a group of a marginal group of God seekers. However, placing Sufism within the broader and varied context of the Islamic tradition reveals that Sufis have actually produced complex systems of thought and elaborate interpretive traditions, and that the Sufi tradition embraces a whole range of political, social, institutional, hermeneutical, literary, aesthetic features within the Islamic tradition. And this understanding of the Sufi tradition also helps us to situate women's roles within the broader or the complex discursive formations of religious authority in Islam.
Okay. So how did you become involved in doing this kind of work? What led you to it?
So first, because of my academic interest in the forms of and changes of female Islamic authority, but I've been interested in this particular topic because Moroccan women's historical participation in Sufism has received very little scholarly attention.
Okay.
The primary sources that we have for these roles and practices are basically historical or hagiographic accounts where, of course, male subjectivities dominate, and especially that these works are written by men, so there's little space that is devoted for women's spirituality. There's also anthropological studies and travel literature or accounts, and these usually have Orientalist motives and have contributed largely to constructing the binary of official or formal Islam that is male, rational, legal, as opposed to popular or informal Islam that is female, irrational, and spiritual. So there is some lost narrative there that needs to be retrieved. Thankfully, recent scholarship has started to account for the nuances and the differences within women's religious and spiritual expression. Another motive is, of course, personal. As a person of faith who seeks to fit in some form of spiritual space and navigates the complexity of the experience, I do believe in the importance of claiming a narrative that tends to be unheard in the loud rhetoric surrounding the woman question and the dominant discourses that tend to define women's social roles in Muslim contexts.
So talk about the field work you did to do this paper.
So I conducted ethnographic fieldwork for the period of 3 years or even more because of my personal interest in the tradition. So the purpose of this fieldwork was to investigate women's participation within Sufi orders and how this participation both complicates and sustains perceptions of the gendered space and the gendered practice of spiritual authority. So it was very interesting to look at the discrepancies between the commonly held belief that women are excluded from positions of leadership and public performance, and how these women get to define leadership and public performance. So I conducted fieldwork within different Sufi orders and across different regions in the country. So it was very fascinating to see that women participate in significant numbers in the tradition, and that the tradition itself is diverse, and that there exists multiple models of participation and leadership, and that there are several avenues for women to practice authority and get recognized as spiritual authorities. So women participate in communal and devotional practices. There are a lot of women who serve as representatives of of main male authorities within their Sufi orders. So they oversee communal activities and they determine the affiliation of future adherents. There's so many women who serve as spiritual teachers. Although women's spiritual leadership is excluded in formal hierarchies within Sufi orders, but there are a lot of women who are recognized as spiritual authorities by their followers and disciples, both men and women. And it was also interesting to study these patterns in parallel with fieldwork I conducted with state-sponsored imams and women activists within Islamist movements, and just observe that these religious trends are not homogeneous, but they're not entirely divergent either. And this really helps us understand the Islamic tradition and women's roles within the tradition beyond essentialist and monolithic perceptions.
Right, very interesting. So in Sufism, is there gender equality between men and women?
Because it is a spiritual realm where there is a strong argument that there's absolute equality between men and women, because it's a realm where only souls are recognized, but not social or biological differences. But of course, the tradition is shaped by sociocultural circumstances. So
what are you finding?
It's not homogeneous. As I said, I conducted fieldwork in different regions of the country where you, of course, get different cultures as well. So there are settings that are more welcoming and open to women and basically offer equal space for both men and women. Like I personally attended communal gatherings where I would be the only woman and I would be seated in the same space as the man, and I would be served tea and food by the man. So I've been into those very welcoming and equal spaces, but you go to other places where, of course, the culture is more conservative, and I think it's also due to the fact that big Sufi orders have sort of structures where men get to choose to have their own space and conduct and oversee their own activities. So yeah.
Okay. All right, so what then are some of the interactions between Sufism and politics in Morocco?
Well, the contested relationship between Sufism and the state in Morocco is as old as Moroccan history. Over periods of history, some Sufi orders have challenged political authorities, manifested political ambition, and established connections with colonial powers, while other Sufi orders demonstrated absolute support to the state. In Morocco's recent history, especially in the context of the country's engagement in counter-radicalization strategies, after the country was hit by a major terrorist attack back in 2003, Sufi orders re-emerged on the scene as a new and powerful social and political force, and established a massive recruitment across different social categories and among both men and women. So Sufism is currently promoted as a tolerant, peaceful, and apolitical form of religiosity, and
which is the opposite of extremist Islam.
And it is exactly, and it is enjoying great state support, because for the very reason that it's considered as a non-oppositional religious trend. Sufism is also heavily promoted in the media, local and international conferences and Sufi music festivals organized all over the country to spread and intellectualize debate about Sufism and encourage aesthetic performance. In 2011, Sufi orders emerged back on the scene as a significant player in the context of the Arab Spring uprisings. So after King Mohammed VI responded to popular protests by drafting a modified constitution, Sufi orders urged their followers to march in large numbers in the streets in support of the new constitution and the monarchy, and this shows the close interactions between religion and politics in Morocco, and also serves to reiterate Morocco's Sufi-oriented religious identity and counterbalance oppositional voices, including the growing Islamist movement.
Now, you mentioned that women can enjoy some form of leadership through Sufism. Does that cross over into the secular world in terms of politics? Do you see more women, because of their role in Sufism, becoming more, have more leadership roles in politics, for instance?
Well, the political sphere in Morocco is, or the public sphere in Morocco is a very heterogeneous sphere. So you get different players and actors. You have political actors that include both Islamist and secular actors, and you have formal religious structures that now include Sufism. So you get different players who have been performing in the public sphere since the earlier history of Morocco, especially after independence. So I personally, what I find interesting is that the institutionalization of certain forms of Islam has contributed to providing more visibility to certain female actors. But of course, women have been active in the public sphere since earlier.
Right, right. But what I think I was trying to get at, because Sufism is supported by the state, do you see more women, more Sufi women, becoming more active in the political parts of Morocco? You see what I'm saying?
You mean within the mainstream political
yes,
sphere?
Yes, yeah.
Not in that sense, because Sufism presents itself as an apolitical form of religious expression. So it's not a movement that would preach involvement in political structures.
Okay.
Although, interestingly enough, it can show up on the political sphere to support the state when necessary.
Right.
But you don't really get Sufis or encouraged to part of political parties or participate visibly or actively within the formal political sphere, although these spaces do overlap, and Sufism is not this really disengaged and apolitical religious expression, but it does interact with politics in different ways.
Okay. So what do you conclude in your paper?
Well, I don't know if I have a conclusion in my paper. This paper was just sort of a beginning in this research, and it has inspired me to do more research on this yet uncharted terrain of research, basically. So I hope to spend some of my time here at Yale to work on pre-modern sources and hagiographies of Sufi women, to sort of construct a historical narrative of how gender operated in pre-modern and modern Sufi circles in Morocco. I am interested in recovering patterns of women's spiritual expression and modes of religious authority, and how that informs contemporary Sufi practices.
Well, very interesting. Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing some of your work.
Thanks for having me.
For more information about Professor El Haitami and her research, please visit our website at macmillanreport.yale.edu. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.